with our keynote speaker. Again, the conference today has been really insightful, and we are really, really grateful to then have here with us Professor Miriam Cooke, who could grace us with her presence. To introduce ma'am, Professor Miriam Cooke is a Braxton Craven Professor Emerita of Arab Cultures at Duke University. She has been a visiting professor in Tunisia, Romania, Indonesia, Qatar, and Alliance of Civilization Institute in Istanbul. She serves on several international advisory boards, including academic journals and institutions. At Duke University, she has taught a wide variety of courses on Arabic literature, war and gender, and the Palestine Israel conflict and post colonial theory. Her writings have focused on the intersection of gender and war in modern Arabic literature and on Arab women writers' construction of Islamic feminism. Her more recent interests have turned to Arab cultural studies with a concentration on Syria and to the network connection among Arabs and Muslims around the world. She's the author of several monographs, with her book on examination of cultural production in the Arabian Gulf called Tribal Modern Branding New Nation in the Arab Gulf, coming out in 2014 from California University Press. Her latest book, dealing with the art of Syrian revolution from 2011 to 2016, is entitled Dancing in Damascus: Creativity, Resilience, and the Syrian Revolution. She has also published a novel, Hayati, My Life. Three of her books were actually named the Choice Outstanding Academic Books, with several being translated into Arabic, Chinese, Dutch, French, and German. We are extremely honored to have you here with us today, ma'am. Over to you.
Good morning, and thank you for that introduction. I had hoped that we could connect earlier. I need to share, and I'm never quite sure how to do it. And I think Rajiv is with us, so let me see. How do I do it?
Okay. You're sharing. We can see your screen.
You can see my screen. Okay,
yes,
so
we can see your screen. Just maximize it, and it's all good.
So then I need from here to go to open. Yeah, this is why I wanted to connect earlier.
Yeah, we can see your screen, yes.
Okay.
It's visible. Yeah,
okay.
Perfect. Yeah, it's there.
It's very good. Okay. Let me see if I can pull this up. Okay, I hope I can see it. This thing is there. That's good. Okay. Once again, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to participate in a conference that I wish I could have attended in person. I may be wrong, but I think it is the first time that I have seen a program for a conference that is entirely devoted to Islamic feminism and its decolonial possibilities. And so as I wrote to Dr. Amina a couple of days ago, I do hope I have something new to say. I think I'm touching on lots and lots of subjects that many of you are analyzing, but I hope that maybe this overview will be helpful. Okay, now why will it not move?
It's moving. It's moving.
Okay. Good. Yes, finally. Okay, so let's start from the very beginning. And I know that you're all very comfortable with the notion of Islamic feminism, but for many, it still is a contested term. And for me, it's a necessary term. And so I will very briefly tear those two words apart. And that is that the anxiety that for the past century and almost a half that has been attached to the word feminism is ill-founded because it is not a Western nor a colonial term, but rather universal. Any woman, from the moment that one is sitting in a high chair eating whatever, cereal, whatever, will recognize that if her brother is sitting right next to her, that there is something different about her treatment. So feminism is recognition of injustice to women just because they're women. And the other term, Islamic, is one that I have analyzed in depth in my book, Women Claim Islam. And that is that Islamic is a very specific term, for me, is a very specific term. And it is on the spectrum between Muslim and Islamist. In other words, it is not because you're born a Muslim. To be a Muslim feminist is different from an Islamic feminist, as it is different from an Islamist feminist. And Zainab al-Ghazali, who you can see on the screen, I'm going to briefly mention, she was considered to be part of the Ikhwan, part of the movement of the Muslim Brothers. She kept herself separate with the Ladies Association, but she was clearly a feminist. Her interpretation of events in her life were feminist. So we can call what she, the position that she was taking was Islamic feminist. Islamic feminism or Islamic feminist position is very different. So it is a commitment to finding justice in a correctly understood Islam. So very important for me, Islamic feminism is not a coherent fixed identity. So you're not an Islamic feminist. You can speak from an Islamic feminist position. So that is absolutely crucial to everything that I'm going to be saying today. So when I say a contingent speaking position, what I'm saying is that it is dependent on one's interlocutors. With whom am I speaking? And how does, as Derrida said in Monolingualism of the Other, how does my interlocutor compel me to speak in a particular way? So in some cases, I will speak in a particular defiant mode, perhaps, but in another position, another speaking position with another interlocutor, I will speak differently. So my example is Zainab al-Ghazali, very important Egyptian woman who wrote a prison memoir. I will talk briefly about it later. But she was in a prison with other Ikhwan, other Muslim brothers. She wasn't a brother, she was a sister. And the entire memoir is almost a handbook to men and women. Look, this is the way to contest people who are trying to keep us quiet. So that was her prison memoir. But when I met with her, she gave me her tafsir. And in the tafsir, there is almost no difference with Tabari. So what she's doing in her tafsir is she is sticking with a rather conservative interpretation of the Quran and of all of the complicated, difficult ayahs on women, because her interlocutors are going to be people who were reading tafsirs. And so that was her speaking, or if you like, her writing position, as opposed to her writing position when she's saying, I, unlike Hudaybi and all the Muslim brothers who are in the same prison with me, because we stood up to Nasser, the devil, my body became sanctified in that place where the men were wimps. So what is this position, this Islamic feminist speaking position? It's a commitment to questioning misogynist Islamic epistemology on behalf of all women, all women actually, but all Muslim women, as an expansion of a faith position. So I am critiquing your misogynistic interpretations of the Quran in a way that makes my faith position, and indeed yours, if you listen to me, much broader than your narrow interpretations. So key here, and this again, I'm hoping that this will remain in your memories, it's a negotiation between textual authority, women's agency, and contemporary human rights discourse. And that, I hope, will become clear as we move along. So we have a necessary term, and for me, a necessary strategy. So I came up with this term, multiple critique, after having read two key texts. One is the Moroccan sociologist Abdelkabir Khatibi's, it looks like English, double critique, but it's double critique. And in it, he talks about, from a Moroccan post-independence position, how can I write my critique of my government, with whom I have fought to get rid of the French, and yet not then sound as though I'm pro-French? And how can I critique the French without sounding as though I'm for my government that is now being oppressive? So that's it. You can, without contradiction, you can critique both the French and the new Moroccan government that has become so like the French, in other words, a government that has not been decolonized. So I add gender to this. So for me, it's the ultimate decolonial position. You can be against your government. You can critique, not be against, but you can critique your government. You can critique the colonial, all the outside imperial forces that are trying to control you. And you can critique patriarchy, and there is no contradiction between them. All three, but once you get to three, you get to multiple. All three are necessary. The other inspiring work was Deborah King's Multiple Consciousness. So for those of you who know W.E.B. Du Bois' folks of Souls of Black Folks, you'll know his term, double consciousness. So I, as a slave in America, but it can be that relationship of slave to owner, I know in a way that you, slave owner, do not know. I know how you see me, and I know how I see you. But you, slave owner, you don't know what I'm thinking. So she adds gender, and then I change her multiple consciousness to multiple critique. So again, I hope this will become clear. Okay, well, I think it's crucial as we think about Islamic feminism that we don't go with a conventional dating. And as I will be going through it and pointing out conventional dating, but in fact, I think we have to go back to Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, because many in the 90s, so that's when officially the Islamic feminist movement took off. There are Jabbar, Mernisi, people that I'm going to be talking about, and Nawal Saadawi have called him an Islamic feminist revolutionary. He was the one who demanded through the Quran, but the words came out of his mouth. Refused what al-banat, so that is female infanticide. So he may not like what was going on in China, where with the one-child policy, if a woman discovered that she was pregnant with a girl, she either aborted it or gave it to an adoption agency. So this wad al-banat, I'm afraid, still goes on today. And he refused it. The Quran insists on women's rights to inherit, but also to own property, and for women's property not to be something that a husband or a brother or any man can take from her. And of course, liberty. That is, so if you look at that, those are the universal human rights, right? Life, property, and liberty. And so liberty, yes, there, la ikrah fi din, no coercion in religion. And what is absolutely crucial here is that education is mandatory for all. So one of the hadiths, one of the traditions is seek knowledge even if in China. And that is not to men, it's to all Muslims. So, as I'm sure you all know, the Prophet's 3 favorite things were perfume, prayer, women. And what he said so often, Jannah taht al-ummahat. And there are 3 crucial women in his life. Khadija was the first one to believe him. When he came from Hira, she said, no, this is not the devil. You are, in fact, chosen. Aisha, his favorite, and here we have Fatima Mernisi, who I will be discussing a little later, who says we have to pay attention to Aisha. She was the person who was closest to the Prophet Muhammad, and she had many more traditions. She passed on many more traditions than any of the companions. And as we shall see later in Fatima Mernisi's work, she corrected some of the companions because they thought they could dream stuff up. And she's like, no, the Prophet never said that. And then, of course, we had his daughter Fatima, who insisted on women's rights through Quranic revelation to inherit. And Asya Jabbar, the Algerian historian, wrote a book called Far from Medina, Loin de Médine, in which she tells the story of Fatima listening in on the Khulafa, the ones who became al-Khulafa al-Rashidun, and realized that they were about to split up the Prophet's property among themselves and not give anything to women. And she's like, hey, my father's hardly cold in his grave, and you're already going against the Quran. So how did I get to Islamic feminism? So it was in the mid-1990s that I was invited to a conference in Oxford to honor my PhD supervisor. He was retiring, Mustafa Badawi, and I was asked to give a talk. Well, I wasn't in the mood to do anything that was traditionally Arabic literature. And I had just read Zainab al-Ghazali's prison memoir, Ayam and Hayati, Days from My Life. And I decided that I would I'd give a paper on that, because for me, a memoir, especially one that is written in this way, was something that needed to be considered as literature. And of course, now with creative nonfiction, this is not a difficult case to make, but it was in the 90s. So anyway, people at the conference weren't super keen on what I was saying, and this isn't literature. And anyway, Zainab al-Ghazali, she's, Islamist. So I very often like negative reactions, because then I know that people are listening. And so I decided to write an entire book based on the negative reaction to my paper there. So then from my experience in Oxford, I thought back to a volume that Margot Badran and I had put together, and that was Opening the Gates, a century of Arab feminist writings. So all in Opening the Gates were Arab. And we included a short translation from Nazira Zainuddin. And who was she? Nobody had ever heard of her. And so I will tell you in a minute who she was. So as I say, in 2000, I publish Women Claim Islam. We have a conference, a virtual conference with the American University of Cairo. And there is a panel there put together to discuss the book. And I was like, oh, that's going to be interesting. That was another occasion when I was roundly chastised for using the term. I wasn't Muslim. Why did I call it Islamic feminism? And so it was part of a fairly extended, I would say, the long decade that was the end of the 80s to the beginning of 2000s, where it really mattered who you were. If you're not Muslim, if you're not Arab, you don't have the right to speak. And that period, fortunately, has passed. So what was important, I think, not only for me, and I do not speak from an Islamic feminist position. I just analyze what people have said. So Sahara Ahmed in 2014 published a book called What is the Veil? What is the hijab? And in it, she writes about gender segregation. And we now know this, but I think it still needs to be said that gender segregation is only to do with the wives of the Prophet. So privileged space of segregation for the most highly honored women, wives of the messenger of God. And she says this gender segregation applies to the Virgin Mary. So when she learns of her virginal pregnancy. Mohija Kaf, a very well-known, highly appreciated Syrian-American poet, is another to contest the exclusion of women, so the gender segregation, particularly in this little poem that's part of a very long, almost epic poem. In my little mosque, there's no room for me to pray. I'm turned away faithfully 5 times a day. My little mosque, so meager in resources, yet so eager to turn away a woman. So there are others who have been very critical of gender segregation. And the key issue in both with gender segregation and the hijab that I'm about to talk about is that it is un-Islamic to mandate it. It is perfectly okay and empowering if it is chosen. So there is a film that came out in '89. So you're beginning to see this, the emergence of a more coordinated reaction to Islamic fundamentalism. Moroccan Farida Ben Yazid's 1989 Bab Sama Maftuh, The Door to the Sky. It's all about a woman who inherits a house, a huge palace in Fez, and she turns it into an Islamic shelter for abused women. So this is chosen, it's empowering, and they do not need men at all because they have their own Quranic reciter. I highly recommend this film to you. So the other non-Islamic contention is around the hijab, as you know. So Sahar Amar, among others, many others, has spoken about the way in which the hijab is has been for hundreds, even thousands of years, a marker of class. So, of course, as the Islamic movement left Arabia and traveled east and west through the Sasanian and the Byzantine empires, the covering was adopted by Muslims. So it was not an Islamic mandate, it was a social cultural adoption. And again, Sahar Amar says there are only 7 mentions in the Quran for hijab, never in terms of dress. So it's a screen. So what I call the jihad against the hijab begins again in the late 19th century. And very importantly, the Egyptian Aisha Taimuriya, who is the mother of very, very important pioneers of modern Arabic literature, wrote her autobiography in 1889. And she writes in it, perhaps I'm not qualified to speak in this sphere, and I admit to my limited powers of grasping the subject at hand, for I'm secluded by the tent of an enveloping wrap, the hijab. Yet across its borders, I perceive that programs of education are treasure chests. We, the assemblage of females kept in seclusion, are more knowledgeable than you, the men, in the formation of the young. And that was a whole argument about feminism as being Western and, running the family. And what she's saying already in 1889 is we are forming the next generation of leaders. Yeah, okay, so the men may be the leaders, but if they are not properly educated when they are young, and they're only going to be educated when they're very young by their mothers, then you're going to have poor leadership. 10 years later, another Egyptian, Qasim Amin, Tahrir al-Mar'a, the liberation of women, wrote a book, this book, that spread across the world. It went as far as Indonesia in various translations. And in it, he writes about the hijab and gender segregation as going against a basic tenet of the Quran and the Prophet's message that I have already talked about. And that is that these two elements that are considered Islamic that are not deprive women of their rights to education. So look for knowledge, even if in China, to all women. And above all, a choice in marriage. So women then become goods to be exchanged. So then 24 years later, we have Huda Sha'rawi, the iconic founder of the Egyptian Feminist Union. And she famously unveils at the Cairo train station, and unveiling Sufur rips around the world. So a short 4 years after Sha'rawi, a bunch of sheikhs in Damascus issue a fatwa. And remember that a fatwa is an opinion. It's a legal opinion, but it is not a law. They issue a fatwa condemning unveiling as heresy. You know, something that during the 20th century just came up again and again as, you know, where do you get this as heresy? And so this young woman, Nazira Zainuddin, who she's in Lebanon, she's Druze. Druze at the time were not considered to be radically separate from Islam, especially as her father had been a Ottoman-trained lawyer in Istanbul. And to be an Ottoman-trained lawyer, judge, meant that you were trained as a Sunni. So he trains her. She's highly educated in French schools in Beirut. And she, within a year of the fatwa, has published a 400-page book called As-Sufur wal-Hijab, Unveiling and Veiling. And she demonstrates how sheikhs have systematically distorted both Quranic interpretation, so tafsir, and hadiths. And one of the hadiths that she's absolutely deaf on, and as are Islamic feminist writings later in the 20th century. So the idea that النساء ناقصات بالدين والعقل, women are lacking in religion and reason, is obviously cannot be something that the Prophet said. And we've already talked about the Prophet's relationship to women and women's rights. She insists that hijab is a matter of choice. I mean, if you want to cover your hair, go ahead. But don't tell me to cover my head because it's my choice. And then as you see in this portrait that her son Arij made of her when she was a young woman, she covers her head, but in a chic turban. Now, the reaction to her book was immediate. The book somehow made it across the world, and there are I have a whole stack of her letters that were written to her, some critiquing, some full of praise. She then wrote a reaction to their reactions, and the sheikhs, then they came together. So the men came together, and this woman is dangerous. She married a Druze leader who, according to her sons, with whom I spoke, told her to, as the French say, tais-toi et sois belle, shut up and be beautiful. And as a result, her feminist ijtihad disappeared for 50 years. And I have here, I think, a very important lesson for all of us who are concerned about women's rights in Islam. And that is what happens when a powerful voice disappears. So for 50 years, she's not cited. She disappears. Her husband must be very happy. So after the Islamic Revolution in Iran and Pakistan's Hudud laws, women began to mobilize as though they were the first. In the 1990s, Islamic feminism, a feminist movement, it begins to emerge, but it's scattered. You know, there's a network here, there's another one there. But in all of them, Nazira Zainuddin is not acknowledged. It's as though all of this is being created from de novo, from scratch. And so our task is to retrieve lost voices. So, you know, what were powerful women in India before partition? What were they writing? We need to know, and we need to thicken this history. So I'm going to talk briefly now about a number of important women leaders who wrote Islamic feminist texts. So Nawala Saadawi, Egyptian doctor, physician, and leader, who established a number of organizations. For her, the veil shrouds women's minds. The minute that you put the veil on, you stop thinking. And she said that women's rights are human rights. Now, this is back in the 60s and 70s, when women's rights are human rights was people didn't use that term. As you know, it's Beijing with Hillary Clinton that this becomes a slogan. So another element, which is much more specific to sort of Egypt and Sudan, is female genital mutilation, so FGM. And the argument that was made for that was that it was Islamic. And her response is, no, it's not. It is torture and must be stopped. So in her 1972 Women and Sex, see that we're here 20 years before the emergence of a more coordinated Islamic feminist response to misogyny. She writes that in that book that she had to, as a physician working in the Egyptian countryside, she had to deal with the radical damage done to girls after female genital mutilation. So she writes about her experience treating these girls, but she also does something that is explosive. She writes about her own. And again, this for me is a pioneer, because in the 1990s, this became international, and, you know, Chandra Mohanty and Alice Walker, there was this movement against it as though it was new, but it wasn't. So when I wrote that Nawal Saadawi, many of her writings were Islamic feminist, um, people were like, no, she was just, anti-men. A, she was not anti-men at all. But B, she knew the Quran as well as many of those self-appointed authorities. And there is a hilarious, and I do recommend that you watch this. There's a debate in Al-Ittijah al-Mu'akas, was Jazeera, had this opposite direction where they would bring in people who clashed. So they brought in Yusuf al-Badri and Nawal. And so afterwards, she did a job on him with Quranic citations. And so she goes to London, and people said, Haram, you destroyed him. And she goes, no, he destroyed himself. So as a result, as you can imagine, I mean, this was after she discovered that she was on the Islamist death list in 92. With the help of my dean here at Duke, we invited her to be here with us in North Carolina until it was going to be safe for her to go back. And here, for the very first time, she said she was able to write her autobiography that she had often tried to start, but it was too difficult for her to keep writing in Egypt because people would recognize themselves. So her autobiographies always turned into novels. And she was totally fearless. I mean, yeah. So, as I say, we have this moment of strategizing for equality and justice that starts in a more coordinated way around the time of the Sisters in Islam in Malaysia, and then there are too many to mention, but there is a beginning of recognition. We have to bring these scattered networks together. So there was an international meeting in Istanbul in 2009 where Musawa, equality, women were demanding distinction between Sharia as the divine ideal and fiqh, jurisprudence or human interpretation. And they, like Ziba Mir Hosseini and various other feminist legal scholars who have looked at manipulation of Islamic texts, have said that the sources of legitimacy are Islamic texts, international human rights frameworks, especially CEDAW, constitutional guarantees of equality, and Muslim women and men's experiences. So Nawal, in 1997, has established the Arab Women's Solidarity Association. And every 2 years, there was a conference. And I thought it'd be interesting for you to hear what she put as the mission for that conference, her platform for Arab feminist political thought. So it's solidarity between women and men. That's crucial in the Arab region, and linking between the cause of women and struggle waged by Arab people, all men and women, for democracy, justice, human rights, and peace. So Fatima Mernissi is another crucial voice. And in her The Veil and Male Elite in 1987, you'll see this clustering in the late 80s. That's what I called the long 1990s decade. That prophetic traditions, hadiths, must be contested. And she's the one who, as I mentioned earlier, talks about Aisha's role, not only in being the one to transmit the largest number of hadiths, but in correcting the companions. And she says, women must study, Muslim women must study Islam to know their rights and, like Nawal, to be able to contest those who twist Islam in favor of patriarchy. But again, as you see, I see that she did not acknowledge Zainuddin. Fatma Nassif, a Saudi rector, like head of the women's section of the King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah, I met with her and she she said that she had weekly meetings with young women, some in mosques, some in the university, some in her home. And for her, it was absolutely crucial that she give weapons, tools to young women to respond to the men and their families, authorities, so they know their rights and how to cite scripture. So we have Amina Wadud, note again, the early 90s. Her Quran and Woman is a feminist deconstruction of women-specific verses of the Quran. And in 94, she is the first woman to deliver a khutbah in Claremont Road Mosque in Cape Town. And then 10 years later, she actually led men and women. So as you know, khutbah, you're facing the audience, the congregation, leading men and women in prayer is something else. That was always thought to be something that women could not do. Then Ziba Mir Hosseini, born the same year as Amina Wadud, who claims that legal interpretations of Islamic texts begins in Iran. Now, obviously, this can be contested, but I think it's important to know where is it that women are thinking, claiming that Islamic feminist discourse analysis begins. And of course, what she then does is, she, in a recent article, she has this connection between 1979 and the beginning of Iranian women's contestation, leading to this recent movement, Woman, Life, Freedom movement, where we have the same thing going on, but 40 years later. Now, for me, what has been really interesting is the 21st century movement in art, poetry, sports, and digital media that I call hijabi activism. And what we have is, you know, in the 20th century, there's contestation against the veil and the chador, and now women are saying, no, we choose to veil. And I've been at dinner tables and lunch tables with friends of mine my age, so women in their 70s who spent their life contesting the hijab as a mandate, fighting with their daughters and granddaughters, who said, no, if I want to cover it, that's my right. So as you have said in your in the mission for this conference, we have all of these digital means of contesting the ways in which women have been silenced and excluded. And what these young women are saying, so these are young women from the age of 18 to, I don't know, 35, who say the hijab empowers women, that it's not false consciousness. And that was the familiar thing. You don't know what you're doing, right? You think you're choosing, but you're not. And so after 9/11, so 6 years after 9/11, I had noticed how many young women who had not been covering had started to cover. And so I coined a neologism, Muslim woman, as one word, to describe how women were using strategic essentialism to perform a singular religious and gender identity that conforms to expectation. Oh, yeah, she's a good Muslim woman. But the minute that the misogynist interpretation reappears, has the language, has the multiple critique to contest it. So you have on your own campus hijabi biker, who I met over lunch in 6 years ago. And so I became very enchanted with her, with hijabi biker here with her ninja. So just other examples of hijabi activists. Mona Haidar, I'm not going to play it now because we're out of time, but do watch her Wrap My Hijab YouTube. And there's also another one that's very controversial, but I think also important to watch, and it's called Dog. And then, of course, Emirati skater Zahara Lari. And I want you to be aware that these are coming from all over the world, right? We have Syria, Mahja Kaf, Mona Haidar, UAE, Emirati, Indian, and here hijabi punks, and the emergence of queer Islamic identity, something that I saw some of you are going to be discussing during this conference. Michael Muhammad Knight wrote a novel, Taqwa Course, in 2004, and here is an image of Imam Rabia, where men consider her their imam. So fine to have her lead prayer. So Mohja Kaf, so another, she's a little older than this very young generation, but in 2003, she writes this hijabi scene. No, I'm not bald under the scarf. No, I'm not from that country where women can't drive cars. No, I would not like to defect. I'm already American, but thank you for offering. What else do you need to know relevant to my buying insurance, opening a bank account, reserving a seat on a flight? Yes, I speak English. Yes, I carry explosives. They're called words. And if you don't get up off your assumptions, they're going to blow you away. So she's not the only one. Here we have a wonderful Saudi woman who participates in the Millions Poet Competition, Sha'ir al-Malyon, that was going on in Qatar, but a number of places in the Arabian Gulf. And she writes this absolutely fantastic poem called Chaos of Fatwas. And she actually was given a prize, not the first prize, but she was given a prize. And what does she say? I saw evil stalking from the eyes of their fatwas. In an era when they contaminated the permitted with the forbidden, I have uncovered the face. She covers her face, but I've uncovered the face of the truth, revealing the monster hidden behind the mask. A savage, resentful, barbaric, blinded man, wearing a cloak of death under a tightened belt, howling and terrifying the populace through brutal politics, preying on every soul, yearning for peace. The one who speaks freely is disgraced. And a jury of men and women were praising her. So the anti-hijab movement hasn't yet gone, and I'm not going to go into this, but Marnia Lazreg, Algerian sociologist, in her 2009 Questioning the Veil, picks up this tired argument against the veil, using exactly the same language that Aisha Taimuriya used in 1889. So in conclusion, I would say that Islamic feminist political thought is made up of many strands that braid together resistances to local, national, religious, and sexual discriminations. In other words, intersectional discriminations. So in closing, let me just give what I think are 6 crucial points for us to think about now in 2025. One, and these are not my, this is not my recommendation. This is my summary of what I have noticed since I started writing about Islamic feminism in the 90s. So understand how mandatory, and that's crucial, right? How mandatory veiling and gender segregation jeopardize social well-being. In other words, harms everyone, men included. Next, study texts, scriptures, and constitutions, even novels that often are a way for people to get political messages across in a way that is more persuasive. So study these texts to have the credentials to challenge misogynist interpretations. Know them enough to be able to cite relevant passages, right? Are الرجال قوامون على النساء? Are men a step higher than women? No, they're not, would be a way of responding. Third, advertise the price society pays for physical and epistemic violence against Muslim women. Again, men and women. For establish organizations, all of the organizations we talked about, Usawa, AUSA, to coordinate strategies to combat intersectional discriminations. 5, contest self-appointed authorities who impose un-Islamic controls on women. And finally, and crucially, and a message for all of us, demand respect for women's right to live as they wish, to love whom they want, and to veil if that is something that they feel empowers them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Cooke. I know you're joining us at not the most convenient time. And I mean, this was the most befitting, most profound, insightful keynote address that we could have, ever asked for. Thank you so much. You really have set the tone for this entire conference. And it just ended with the Qawamun. And earlier in the day, we were just discussing about this. So I'm so grateful and thankful for always readily agreeing to us despite changes in the plans and changes in the timing because of the winter, the clock turning back and all those adjustments. So I'm extremely grateful to you, Professor Cook, and your lecture today, Islamic feminism across time and space. I think it's so comprehensive and so expansive. I don't think you have left anything. You trace the entire genealogy of Islamic feminism and not really looking at it as a contemporary political response, but as a continuum of ethical inquiry, grounded in the Quranic principle, tracing it back to the Prophet, right from where it started, and how women were always the active interlocutors in shaping the early Islamic community. So you have mapped this entire feminist voices, how they have always persisted, centuries of interpretative and political struggle. And also, I think in your very expansive historical cartography, which you took from the worlds of Khadija, you mentioned, and Aisha, and the even the political articulation of thinkers like Nazira Zainuddin, Zainab al-Ghazali. You reveal the entire intellectual lineage that binds this early Islamic ethics with the contemporary feminist hermeneutics. So, and especially when you read Nazira Zainuddin, alongside, Zainab al-Ghazali, I think you demonstrated how these two women, although they were separated by geography and even historical context, how they converge, they come together in the use of the religious language to articulate resistance. And especially, your analysis of Ghazali's Ayyam min Hayati, as a theology of empowerment, and not really where imprisonment was not an endurance. It actually becomes an act of jihad al nafs that you have elsewhere, looked at. So, it served that how faith can serve as a ground for feminist agency, and how submission is transformed into resistance. And equally importantly, I want to point out your concept of the multiple critique. I think it's very, very seminal. And the way our technical sessions have spanned out, we have about 12 to 15 technical sessions, and each one taking us into these multiple set and frames of critique. So there is so much more to say, but I just want to thank you once again, Professor Cook, for joining us and sharing so passionately the entire history. You put it so beautifully, so cogently, tracing it, and also talking about the human rights. So thank you so much for correlating the Islamic feminist discourse and how relevant it is. Thank you so much. I would request our chairperson of the conference, Professor Nishad Zaidi, also to please sum up this, first day of the conference, which we are closing now with Professor Cook's keynote.
Thank you so much, Professor Cook. As Amina said very rightly, that we couldn't have asked for a better keynote address than this for this conference. And uh, because of the time zones, uh, we have it at the end of the day. Ideally, we would have loved to have it at the beginning, but still, I think it works better because we began with speakers who were talking, who were coming from practices, from real life experiences. Then we had a very interesting panel discussion where we had speakers talk about Muslim women in India, education of Muslim women in India. And after all of that, coming to the end and talking about the broad overview of Islamic feminism, I think this is the best end of the day. Thank you so much. It was really very useful, very enlightening, and I'm sure all the audience, and because we are recording this, it will be made available to others. It will be a learning experience. Thank you so much.
I just want to
Thank you
add
for having.
just one last thing, Professor Cook. I have traced the hijabi bikers, and they have a very active social media handle, and I will also try to get in touch with them. I think they're still very active in that hijabi bikers group still. So thank you for pointing me in that direction. Thank you so much. I think I will request Arushi now for an official vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Sarojini Naidu Center for Women's Studies, it is my honor to deliver the vote of thanks today. First and foremost, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to our chief patron, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Jamia Millia Islamia, Professor Mazhar Asif, for his unwavering support to all our academic initiatives. We are equally thankful to our patron and Registrar of Jamia Millia Islamia, Professor Mehtab Alam Rizvi, for his constant guidance and encouragement. Our deepest appreciation goes to Professor Cook for giving us her time and also such an insightful session on Islamic feminism, with so thoroughly introducing us to the contours of Islamic feminism in academia and in action, historically and contemporary. With much resources, I would also including primary and secondary and scholars that we can take away as researchers ourselves. We are truly honored by your presence and enriched by your scholarship, ma'am. A special note
Thank
of thanks. Thank you. A special note of thanks to Professor Nishad Zadi, the Honorable Director of our center and chairperson of our conference over the 2 days, whose visionary leadership and tireless efforts have been the cornerstone of our initiatives. Thank you so much, ma'am. I would also like to thank Dr. Amina Hussain, the convener of our conference, for her meticulous planning and for giving us the opportunity to interact with such eminent scholars in the field and for giving people the platform to be able to be here today. My sincere thanks to the esteemed faculty and non faculty members of the Sarojini Naidu Center for Women's Studies for their continued support and valuable presence. I especially thank the student volunteers for ensuring that all the sessions have gone seamlessly and the event has been a very miraculous success. Last but certainly not least, a big thank you to all the research scholars, students, and participants from across universities for joining us today and making this discussion so engaging and meaningful. Active participation is what makes these sessions truly impactful. Thank you all once again. I think we look forward to your continued engagement in our sessions tomorrow and beyond. We shall reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. for our next technical session. Have a great evening, everyone.